All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Right now, we will be talking about Black owned, a discussion about Black businesses. My name is Kiad Burke, policy analyst at Hope Policy Institute. And today, I will be joined by two panelists that will help us discuss the state of Black businesses as they have been affected and impacted by COVID 19. Okay? Our first panelist is Miss Willie Jones. Miss Jones is a workforce developer in the state of Mississippi. She is a founder and president of Dependable Source Corporation, Center for Community and Workforce Development, providing workforce solutions to the transportation industry by providing a set of interconnected solutions that meet the workforce needs of Mississippi. Miss Willie Jones has been supplying experienced professional workers to commercial jobs and manufacturers throughout the state. Okay. The next panelist we have is Ms. Kathy Northington, Chief Operating Officer of the Mississippi Economic Council. She began at MEC as part-time support in 2003 and worked her way up to COO as of 2018. So today we will be discussing, again, the state of Black businesses. And I'd like to begin with this question. COVID-19 has placed a strain on many small businesses throughout the country, particularly businesses of color. The impact of the pandemic is exacerbated by pre-existing challenges in communities of color. But prior to the pandemic, what challenges beset businesses of color prior to the pandemic? Can you hear me now?
Okay, now here we go. Now we're live. Okay.
Oh,
Okay. And was that a question directly to me or Kathy, or you just want us to try?
That's the open-ended question.
Okay. Well,
So,
I'll start by talking about a few things. You asked about what were some of the challenges that Black-owned businesses had before the pandemic. And I think it's the same ones that similarly exist now is access. There were maybe opportunities out there for Black-owned businesses to expand their capacity, but entry into those particular opportunities, whether they be around grants or loans and that type of thing, was a challenge to a lot of small businesses. I don't know if it's how those particular opportunities have been written, that they don't put consideration, they don't really address the needs of Black-owned businesses, but that was a big challenge, and especially for women. Access and making sure that the grant opportunities that are out there, that the wording, eligibility requirements, making sure that they don't exclude Black-owned businesses instead of helping them. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges. The other thing around Black businesses is I think a lot of times it's been our history in our community. A lot of times our talents, our skills, or sometimes our hobbies maybe not necessarily would make a great business opportunity for us. And so we have to begin to rethink the needs in the market as it relates to trying to create a successful venture that's going to not only provide good products and services, but also it's going to empower us in our communities.
I want to piggyback on Willie for a second and talk about access. Working for the state chamber, historically, state chambers have been very conservative and they've been big business. We're realizing now, I've been there for 17 years, and we're understanding that it's important that local communities are the pillars of the state. So the state cannot survive, the state cannot grow without the local communities. And local communities can touch, they can have hands-on and connect with the businesses. And MEC has been doing that for the past couple of months, really nailing down on it, because we hear these problems. We hear about access. We hear about things that they need, availability to funds, money. And that's a huge part, being able to get to the table, and in order to get to the table, you have to have finances. And a lot of them are having issues with getting that capital they need. Could it be credit or just different issues? But that has been our main thing. We've done roundtables partnering with the U.S. Chamber because they're getting that statewide, and Kellogg, where we going to 11 different cities around the state talking about these issues around small businesses, Black businesses, minority-owned businesses. What are the concerns? What are the problems? And they're saying access, but they're also saying capital. And they're also saying when they get into these doors, if they get into these doors, it's a one and done, and it needs to be a continual. Before COVID, they were struggling. They had the same struggles before COVID that they're having now, but now COVID has added to it. And what's happening, we're saying there's grants out there, there's money out there, go do it. And then you fill it out, but you don't understand exactly the money that you're given, that some is forgiven, some is not. And then you're in the same place. So I think as a business leader and an organization that says we're the voice of business, we have to be, we were grown up saying, it takes a village, and that village doesn't just put you out there and say, okay, go off and be merry. The village gives you the tools, and then they help you along the way. And that's what a lot of businesses are saying. Yes, we need the resources, we need the capital, we need the connectivity, we need the access. But once we get in those rooms and once we get there, we need help to continue, because some of them are doing the marketing, they're doing answering the phones, they're doing the actual work, and they're one person business. You say Black owned business, it doesn't mean it's a big corporation. It's one person or two people doing the same thing.
And also, is that when we talk about these particular issues around access, much of it is about we don't have the small business voices at the table when these particular programs are being designed and the rules that are being set up for access and administration of whether they be a grant fund or loan funds. Those voices are not at the table. And then there's also not structures in place with the leadership that administer these dollars, is to say, even if we were at the table, are we making sure that there is a very simple, transparent program in place or system in place to where when this information is shared, that is actually not only addressed, but it's included in how these particular programs are put together for administration out there to the public. So, and I just recently read something where it was some large number. I want to say 75% of small of jobs are coming from small businesses on a national basis, whether it be Black, white, or whatever. If it's a small businesses, we are providing a lot of job opportunities for individuals. So it's important for Mississippi and in any other community to make sure that we're empowering small businesses so that it impacts our entire economy.
I agree. And we're talking about the seat at the table, and we're not at the table. And I've realized that quite often that we're not represented at the table. I just had a conversation with a project that we're working on, and I mentioned that to them, and I mentioned that Black businesses we're not included in the strategy, but we're included in the implementation and the execution. And by the time you get to that point, we've left out a lot. And I wouldn't dare say we've come a long way. Yeah, we've come to a certain point, and there's a long way to go. But I think another part of that is too that a lot of times the doors are shut in our face before we get to the door, and we have to be strategic in how we're getting into these rooms and make sure we're at the table, because that's a huge part of it too. And if we believe that there's not a strategy to get into the room, we're sadly mistaken. And yes, we need to be a part of those conversations, but we also have to have these conversations with the businesses and say, hey, who we're going to let at the table, because everybody can't get to the table, but we have to trust one another and believe in the person that we're helping push to that table, and making sure we're doing things in a way where they're representing us and our voice, and also making it where they're staying at the table and don't, hurt that part of it. But I think a lot of times that's a huge part of it, is that so many people want to be at the table. And yes, there's a room for a lot of us, but if we're really, truly real, where we are and where we sit, it's a little hard. So a huge part of the strategy is understanding how to get into that room and get to the table. And another part of that strategy is once we have a person or people at that table, supporting them and letting them hear their voice so they can stay at that table and filter that information back to you. Because everyone can't get at the table.
So
And
it
one of the
seems
things
like
that's good about the pandemic that addresses that particular issue around small businesses is now those small businesses understand how the game is played, and they're being much more proactive. They're being much more aggressive about making sure that they're in those spaces. And one thing that I'm seeing on a huge scale, especially it relates to women-owned businesses, is that now they're open more to working together, sharing information, sharing resources, coming together and strategizing. Make sure that I think on a big scale is sharing the work that we do. A lot of times we're working and doing amazing things in very small silos, and we don't know about the impactful work that small businesses are doing. So that's one thing that's positive about what's happening with the pandemic.
I agree with that 100%. And we talked about that on a panel yesterday, that we're now seeing more than ever that women are empowering one another. And not only just women, just age, gender, because age is left out of that a lot. I find myself stuck in the middle because I think I'm younger than I really am until I start doing something. I'm like, wait, Kathy, you're not that young. But a lot of times we leave out, I hear so often, oh, they're too young, they're not ready. And they're saying now, people are staying in the workforce longer. And so they're holding on to that. And I was having a conversation with someone who's like, okay, why can't we get younger people? And I was like, well, there's something about power being that person in that room. In order to let others in, you have to let go of some of that power. And if we're being honest with one another, a lot of us love that influence and that power of being in that room. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to let some of that go and share it, because I know that there's a lot to go around and there's a lot to share, but that's something that we all have to agree on and work on. But yes, I just think we need to strategize and have these discussions on how to get into this room and who are we going to work with to groom to get in those rooms.
So there have been several things that have been discussed that I think we might want to just amplify and tease out. The first being structural challenges and inequities that have seemed to create disparities between Black-owned businesses and white-owned businesses. The first thing I want to raise is the Payment Protection Program. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government, particularly at least in the first round, it allocates $350 billion to small businesses throughout the country. However, sole proprietors were not able to access those funds the first week of allocation. What's interesting is that about 80% of Latino and Black businesses are sole proprietors. Effectively, that means that these communities bypass these communities for the first week of the program. So my question to you, what does that mean for minority-owned businesses to struggle to get access at the federal level? And then secondly, what are some additional avenues of access at the state level?
You have to stay informed, and yes, that was happening. That was happening on the federal level and the local level. People were finding out about it way before, and people take care of their own, and so you have to stay informed, and you have to say, hey, I'm here, and you have to stay resilient, and you can't give up even if you're being told no over and over again. You have to be, I heard someone say, my grandmother used to say, you have to be the gum on the bottom of their shoe. And sometimes we don't want to do that. We'll just throw in the towel. And sometimes we don't have time to do that. And so we just move on to the next thing. But you have to know what's happening on both sides. You have to understand what's happening on both sides, your competitor, your people that think like you and don't think like you, because in order to get to that point, you kind of have to think outside of your normal way of thinking, and you have to get in those circles and understand that language and find out that language. And it's hard, but it's a part of stepping out of our comfort zone and just being the gum on their shoe and say, hey, what's happening? What did I miss something? And you have to go in places and rooms that you don't normally go to, that don't normally welcome us, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be high, but you got to be in those rooms because that's how you hear that information.
Mr. Bird, I agree with Kathy and everything she said, but I believe here we need to call a spade a spade. There's inequality in distribution of funding in this state. And I'm sure it probably is not just to Mississippi. I'm sure it's in other places, because I know businesses have seasoned that have been doing some amazing jobs and amazing work in this state, putting people to work for great products and services. They've dotted every I, they've crossed every T, and that access to those, even the PPP stipulations. There were many businesses, even when they were not sole proprietors, there were if individuals who had a capacity of staff, they had major obstacles in getting funded. And then also when that PPP ruling and money was dispersed, the rules changed in the middle. It changed. I mean, it started out one thing, and then by the time the application process came along, that process changed, and it wasn't for the better. So it was almost as if when we began to look at it, that it was set up to specifically eliminate a large part of small businesses who needed that those particular loans in a very critical time. So now when we talk about how that's going to impact Black businesses, we're talking probably 50% of the Black-owned businesses are not going to be able to come back online. And many of these services, when we think about the African-American community, we needed those businesses to stay there. I mean, especially when you're talking about women-owned businesses, when that was the bread and butter for many. And now what do? And then when we think about the state economy, it's going to impact the state economy in a very large way. So there is significant, very clear inequality as it relates to disbursement of funds and grants and loans and etc. And it goes back to how we structure these things and who is at the table. Because when we think about leadership, and I don't need to go to another subject about the election that's coming up, that's why it's important to have good leadership. Good leadership makes sure that whatever resources is out there, that we're maximizing those opportunities for the entire state of Mississippi. And the way I look at it, it's not even a Black or white issue. It's about what's good for Mississippi. And if we make sure that all populations of individuals and all types of businesses, we have a history in this state that the big business, they get the help and the small businesses gets the scraps. I'm gonna just be honest. And this is something that I'm hearing even more from small businesses here in the state of Mississippi, specifically around COVID. It's almost like COVID has unveiled and opened up and turned over some rocks that's been around a very, very long time. And I like to talk about what's been good about going through this pandemic. We are looking at things differently. We're moving forward with an awareness that we didn't have before, and we need to make sure that we continue that. And that's still going to take a lot of work. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But leadership is so important to all. It's going to drive all of this. Around funding, around loans, around who's at the table, even on the level of the persons who are administering these particular loans and these particular grants, and the quality of those individuals who is administering them.
Well, Ms. Whitley, I mean, like you said, when we're calling spade a spade, and you're not saying anything I don't think anyone knows. Yes, I will be the first and of many that say things are not equal. By no means. And I would also say that, yes, I's are dotted, T's are crossed. And I will also say some of those big businesses that didn't have I's dotted and T's crossed got the money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, yes, you are absolutely correct. What I'm saying is we have to be strategic, and we can't, if I'm a small business, I have to make sure I am talking and in rooms with people that are not a small business so I can find out their language and understand their language. And I think sometimes when we get in those rooms, we feel like we have to prove that we deserve to be in those rooms. And a lot of times, I mean, if we're being honest on here, when we're proving that we're in those rooms and we're continuing to make loud noises, sometimes those people that are saying things that we need to hear the most become quiet because they realize we're listening. And so sometimes we just have to get in those rooms and listen and take all that in and realize that we're in those rooms because we're in them and we don't have to prove to anybody that we are being heard. And you can find out a lot of those informations, but it's a matter of being in places that you're very uncomfortable being in, hearing things that's going to make your skin crawl, but also hearing those things that will benefit you in the end. And you can take it into these small communities and say, hey, let me pass a little word to you about what's going on. But in order to do that, we have to be comfortable going into those rooms and figuring out who's going to be in those rooms. And yes, I have seen inequality happen time and time and time again. And it is tough. It's hard, but I also have learned a lot, and I've been able to, and I would hope so, to drop a few pebbles to some. And I also have dropped pebbles to some that have thrown some back at me, but that's fine too. It's not going to keep me from continuing to do that. But yes, is not equal, is not access, is not being distributed fairly. And yes, we need to be a voice at that table. And yes, we need to go vote Tuesday if we haven't voted already. And I think a lot of us have done that. And we need to make it heard what we have, what we need, and be in those spaces where we can find out where these resources are.
So I think it's a great point. And I think another thing I may want to raise, it seems that we're talking about some structural issues, and then we're talking about the way in which we respond. So the next question I would ask then is, how do we hold these institutions accountable? I know at the federal level, we've had issues for our Black-owned small businesses getting access to the Payment Protection Program. But what about at the state level? Mississippi used its CARES Act money to create $300 million. $300 million was dedicated to small business relief, with $60 million being allocated to direct payments and $240 million being allocated to the business grant fund. However, during the first 60 days, MDA only deployed $2 million, which just totaled out to 2,000 businesses. And in addition, they had originally set aside $40 million for the first 60 days for minority-owned businesses. So in effect, the set-aside was qualified by the slow pace of deployment by MDA. So just two questions that come from that is, what then does that mean for our Black-owned businesses here in the state? And then what could we do to hold MDA accountable, or what is needed or necessary to move the ball forward for Black-owned businesses in Mississippi?
I want to start that by saying something that Kathy mentioned earlier is we can't stop. We got to keep moving forward with strategies that's going to really work. But let me throw out a few things. We have legislators in our state that represent us, and both sides of the aisle, whether Democrat or Republican, and we got to work both sides of the aisles. One thing that we got to call on both of those representatives to let them know that we know what's happening. We got to share the challenges that we're having as small businesses. We got to give when we have some solutions that we want to share with them, because sometimes they don't know. They don't know what to do or how to help us. We need to kind of help them help us. But the main thing is with our representative, we have to share what's going on. We have to, when you talk about accountability, it is their job to hear what we have to say and come up with ideas and solutions, if it's nothing else but sharing our stories when they're sitting in committees, when they're sitting in rules committees and how these things are being formulated and put together. And then they need to be the voice for us. If there's some issues around small businesses that we need some help and support, we expect them to make a few phone calls on our behalf to say, this is going on. How can we help this particular business? And it may be 2 businesses, it may be 3 businesses. They need to make phone calls on our behalf and advocate for us. So when it comes to accountability, we got to work with our legislators. We got to work with the people we have put in office and put in place. Then the other thing that hopefully we're doing is making sure that we continue, as Kathy talked about early, is showing up. We got to show up. We have to look at ways right now during COVID on how we can work together. Sometimes it's going to be even beyond these PP loans. So we got to look beyond some of these back to business programs that's supposedly out there to help us. And then my big question is, this money that has not been dispersed yet, what's going to happen to it when it's not dispersed? Where does it go? Does it go to some discretionary funds out there that goes in other places that are not going to support business development? Maybe we can look at ideas of converting it to workforce training for African American communities. So that's a big question for me right now, because if I'm thinking about all the money and all the businesses I'm talking to that have not gotten funded, and so where does this money go? How do we come back to the table and reevaluate that? So we have a lot of questions to ask. But we know that there's only a certain number of people who have the answer to that. Now that's our leadership. So we need to be asking the right questions.
I agree. Look, I wish I had the answer to those questions, but I don't. But you're right. It's our leadership. The leadership, they're in charge of who's appointed, the top leadership at MDA. So if you put the heat on them, well, like I said, you have to be strategic. You have to have a strategy. You can't go in doing something without a strategy that's a collective strategy. And, so often I see 10 different people they have the same concept, but they're not working together because who does it better? I'm not saying that we're not in a place where there's nothing wrong with healthy competition, but we're at a point where we're desperate. Small businesses, the Black community, minority businesses are struggling. And so I think we're at a point where it's not about I can do it better than you, or I can do it this way and you do it that way. I think we need to get together as one and strategize on how we can do it and who's the best person to get that message across and hold people accountable. My grandmother used to say, everybody that look like you is not like you. And we have to realize that. And if we want, we're Black folks, so let's go to church, pray for discernment, because there are a lot of people that are not for you. And you have to know that when you're going into those rooms, because they can tear that strategy apart. And so I believe we need to work together on a strategy to find that out and help each other in the community. And we're just going to have to figure out of the group who is the best person to do it, because what we're doing is fighting against one another a lot of times. It's bad enough that we have to fight anyway in our own rights, for equality, but we're fighting against each other instead of, a lot of times, and I'm not saying it's all the time, because I have people in my corner that I can rely on all the time. I have people that I can call on, Willie. I'll call you if I need you. And I think it's the same, we were just talking about before we went live that we need to get together for lunch. And we have to have these conversations often and not just when there's a need for something. It needs to be often with people around the table that understand, we often say like-minded. I'm saying, well, we say like-minded and we talk about diversity, which one we want, because we can't have them all. But we have to be strategic. And when we're being strategic and strategizing on what needs to be done, I don't have to like you and you don't have to like me, but we have to be there for the better good for Black businesses in our communities.
And also, Mr. Bird, I want to say this too. Yes, everybody is looking for money is not the thing that's going to help all of us. We know with a lot of our small businesses, even before COVID, there were some things that we needed help and support around, and it may be not necessarily financial. But even now that a lot of businesses have gone out of business and are not going to be coming online, but also we need to look at the opportunities that COVID and the pandemic has presented itself. And that's going to be the next step. I mean, yes, we have to do the accountability piece. We have to make sure that we have access to whatever the opportunities that are out there around financial. But there's some wonderful opportunities out there also that has nothing to do with finance. You talked about Mr. Bynum and what the work that he's doing. Those are champions that we need to look for. There's some more Mr. Bynums out there that's doing the work. We appreciate what he's doing and the effort that he's leading, but there's some more champions out there for us also to be able to do. Also, many women right now, when you talk about that, they might have had a business before, or they may have worked for a business a small business that is no longer in existence. But those skills and talents that individuals have that work within that particular company, now they may be able to take those skills and those talents and create a new opportunity for themselves. Before, they were getting paid hourly or on a contractual basis or whatever for that particular company. Now take your talent and skills and see what you can take out there in the market and create an opportunity for yourself. Even if you don't want to call it a business, call it an opportunity. And then many women are pivoting right now. Many women are saying, hey, I had this business. I was struggling with it for 5 or 10 years anyway. This is an opportunity for, one of my guests on my podcast said the other day, if the business is struggling and it's about to close its door, let that door slam and then move on to the next opportunity. And don't wait too long to make that pivot. I think many of us, I know over my career and my business life, sometimes we figure if we work 100, we're working 100%, but we figure if we throw in another 50%, it's going to make it better. And sometimes 150% does not make it better. It's just not a good opportunity, or it may be a good opportunity, but may not be the good opportunity right now. Maybe it's something that needs to be put on the back burner to later. So where we are right now, I want to say over and over again, yes, we're talking about these issues and the challenges that we have and the threats to small businesses, but I'm telling you, there is overwhelming opportunities in the midst of COVID for us, and we must take them out. Because when you look at the statistics, we're talking about large number of small businesses that are gone away and will not come back. And I tell you what really hurt us too around the PPP loans and the loans like Back to Business. What hurt us is the length of time it took them to distribute these funds. Because many of the businesses, when COVID hit and after a few months, they needed those funded yesterday, and they could not survive even the time period that the state took to put these things in place. And now, I mean, when a lot of these plans on the Back to Business opened up, it took 90 days for much of this money to be distributed to small businesses. And when you're in the midst of a pandemic, 90 days is a very long period of time.
Yeah. And, to your point, about 41% of Black-owned businesses had closed due to COVID by April. Mm-hmm. By April. And so just imagining the type of need and demand they were lacking because of the slowness to allocate and deploy funds from either state or federal budgets, or rather allocations, is startling. But Kathy, you mentioned strategy and being strategic in how we choose to collaborate and engage in people and institutions of power. Currently, there is a push for large corporations to invest 2% of their net income over the next 10 years in Black businesses. Bill Bynum, our CEO, is one of those advocates, as well as CEO of other CFIs and cooperative credit unions. What are your thoughts on the strategy? And to you, Ms. Jones, what do you think are some additional ways that large corporations and the business community could support Black-owned businesses, from whether it be investment with capital or whether it be access to knowledge sharing? But what are your thoughts on that 2% the 2% initiative? And then outside of that, what are some additional ways to garner support for Black-owned businesses?
I think it's a good bit of all of it, and hold them accountable. They're at a point now where they're vulnerable, and they're not doing it. We can say, before, people will do it because it's the right thing to do. Right now, it's the right thing to do, and it's about survival because the minority is turning into the majority, and so they need it to survive. And so, right now, we have that power, that bargaining power to say, hey, we're here. The 2%, there's a lot of companies, Hancock Bank is one on the coast that's saying, what can we do? How can we do this? And I am ready to pull my hair out because I so often hear, I was having a debate with somebody, they were talking about Wells Fargo. It's like, there's not qualified minority contractors. They're just not qualified African-American candidates, minority candidates. And I said, I disagree. There's tons out there. You just have to be innovative in where you're looking at them and looking for them. And also, as minority businesses, we have, and I keep saying that because I have been there before, but with that, you have to say, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. And hey, I'm the only one in the room that looks like me, but I'm not going anywhere. And I know you're looking at me crazy and don't want me to be here, but I'm still here and I will continue to be here. And yes, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? We think we know it. And a lot of times we can get that knowledge share and we can get those companies that we're continuing to knock on your door and say, hey, I'm a small business that's doing what you're doing. I can't do everything on your level because I don't have your capacity, but I can be an avenue to help you, and in turn, you help me. And we need to do that. You're not competing with them because you can't do what you don't have that ability to do it anyway because you don't have the workforce, you don't have the money. And we would like to say, yeah, money's not everything, but it is huge. When you're having a situation when before COVID hit, the first 60 days, businesses were closing. That's the case. That didn't happen before COVID. They were struggling before COVID hit. And we need to teach them to be strong and have that foundation. So when something like a COVID hit, and yes, don't get me wrong, there's huge corporations that are struggling, closing their doors too. But we as a community or as the small business community, we need to work on how can we have that stability and that structure the best we can. So when a COVID hit, you're prepared. COVID caught us all off guard. There are people lost their jobs. There are people lost, and we couldn't do anything about it. But there are some that had the ability to put some money up and some that would have wanted to put money up and couldn't. But we have to figure out ways where we can strengthen what we have. And so we can last more than 60 days into a crisis. And right now, like Willie said, this is an opportunity. They say crisis breed innovation. We need to figure out what innovative ways to continue to grow. And we also, the word essential took on a totally different meaning during COVID. You're thinking essential. This business is essential. This business is not essential. And when I heard that word over and over again about first time of the month, I was like, okay, what do I need to do to be essential? Not only in my business, but in my personal life. I'm coming out of this and I'm going to be essential. So you cannot do anything you need to do without a Kathy Northington. And I think a lot of times in small businesses, we need to be thinking now, what is our essential thing? That when the list comes out of who's essential and who's not, there's no question if your name is on that list. And with that, we have to think about things innovatively. And like Willie said, it is scary to step out on that, we've always said step out on faith. And you're like, yeah, step out on faith, but you have to work hard too. But right now, we were built for this. We built this country, and for some reason, I don't know if we forgot, but we know how to do the work and we know how to be creative in doing it because a lot of us had to improvise because we didn't have what I know I had to because I didn't have the things I wanted to have, but I had to improvise and make it work. And that's what we have to do in business. In this business, we have to use this crisis as a way to think through ways we can do things differently, the way only we can do it, so we can walk out of this essential with the money in our pockets. Because I don't know about you, money, I need that to do not only what I need to do, but in order to help others, I need that financial backing and I need that financial stability.
Absolutely. Ms. Jones, do you have a stab at the question?
Yeah, I want to talk about that 2% that you talked about with the big businesses investing. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good idea if we make sure that whatever that 2%, 3%, whatever they're willing to invest, that is beneficial for the business. I mean, businesses, like Kathy said, small, large, all of us are struggling. So if we're making that, if larger businesses are making that investment, they need to get a return on that investment. And I love the idea that's right now, there seems to be a movement throughout this country is internship programs. I think internship programs, apprenticeship programs, I think there are so important right now. When you look at internship programs, that is a way for when the companies that had to lay off their staff, and now they're getting back to where they're having to grow those staffs back administratively. They need to be able to bring those individuals back, or either the ones that don't come back to be able to bring good people in there with innovative ideas. But a lot of times when we bring these individuals in, there's a training process. They need to learn that company. They need to learn how that company works, the culture of that company. And these internship programs allow them an opportunity to do that, and it helps the bottom line of that particular company. So I'm big on that particular piece of it. And then the other piece is when we're talking about the thousands and thousands of people that are unemployed, it is a great opportunity for them to learn another trade, another way of doing things, because they may be working an internship program that's in a different industry. So I'm loving the idea of internship programs and apprenticeship programs that's going to empower us in a lot of different ways. Let's use, for example, if you have a young person who graduated from college during COVID. Now, there's not a lot of jobs out there, but if there's let's say their area was IT. Now they have an opportunity to go to work for a particular company and learn industry. And before they even think about now eventually becoming an entrepreneur on their own, they're learning that industry. They're learning what they need to do. They're taking their time to do that. And that particular company is being empowered by somebody who may be very motivated and has some innovative ideas. So it becomes a win-win, not only for that business, not only for that individual, but for our economy. Because now you got people off the unemployment rolls. You got businesses that are expanding their capacity, and they're growing, and they're being healed by this process. So when I talk about we need to look at other opportunities, those are the type of opportunities I'm talking about: internship programs, apprenticeship programs. And there's many of us, and that funding comes from different levels of our government on the federal and state level that we're able to utilize. And then we have foundations who are working to support those particular type of efforts. We have to look at the foundations and the nonprofit organizations who are providing these strategy tools that we're talking about, that education tool. Folks need to jump on board, make sure that they're getting into webinars and podcasts around these foundations and organizers that are already investing their money to make sure that individuals and corporations get the education they need and the innovative ideas they need in order to succeed. So we need to look not just for the financial help, we need to look for also the empowerment help, the education help, the innovative help in order to grow our businesses. So I'm excited about this because there's some programs out there and there's some opportunities out there, and there's some areas where the private foundations are going that they did not go before COVID-19. So we just have to maximize all of those opportunities.
I'd agree with you as well. It's also important to note that, it's important to have federal and state resources targeted toward institutions that serve our Black-owned and our other minority-owned businesses in these communities. As you all know, Hope is a CDFI, and so we were very instrumental at the federal level in making sure that CDFIs were able to get. It was a $10 billion set aside in which we, as community minded financial institutions, best serve those communities that are often overlooked by mainstream financial entities. But I'd also say that we know prior to the pandemic, our Black-owned businesses in our communities are often riddled with poverty, high unemployment, and poor health outcomes, had weaker relationships with financial institutions. They had less access to capital, less access to credit, and overall, when a pandemic strikes, they have less access to federal relief. In so much as when the pandemic unfolds, particularly with PPP, we were hearing stories from our borrowers or members in the community saying, "I went to one particular financial institution, they didn't prioritize my loan. So I'm here for just step. Can you help me? What can you do for me?" Right? And so I think as an analyst, I'm so focused on the structural impediments that Black-owned businesses face, even if they've dotted their I's and crossed their T's. Mm-hmm. I think also, as we kind of come into this section, open up a question and answers, and then closing remarks. I like to ask again, in an ideal world. Actually, let me double. To the best of your knowledge, how have businesses remained resilient? If 40% of Black-owned businesses have shut their doors because of COVID, how do you understand, how are we to understand the remaining portion that are making a way? Are you all hearing stories about businesses that are doing the imaginative and the creative to keep their doors open? And just to help dialogue, I'll give you an example. I know a few barbers that left their brick and mortar shop to cut hair on a trailer in the street, giving the people where they were, and also adhering in ways to the health regulations to stay safe. That's an example of innovative and creative, but that's working outside of the structural impediment, right? But again, when these sole proprietors were not getting adequate access to. The Back to Business program did have a fairly easy application process for sole proprietors, so they were able to get access to the Back to Business program. But I open the floor to you. Have you all heard stories of businesses being created during this time?
I think the number one thing that I'm hearing from small businesses, I sometimes I hate using that word small businesses because it's like, how do we define small businesses? At one time we had a staff of 50 administrative staff, and we kept calling ourselves small business. Somebody said to me, "Well, Ms. Jones, you no longer a small business." So, but let me just say businesses of color. What I hear overwhelmingly that happened that helped prop up and keep the walls from falling in was people working together. I heard stories where people were sharing their resources with each other. When I say resources, I'm not talking financial. I'm talking about skills and talents. They were sharing their skills and talents with each other. They would hear about a informational session to help empower their business in some type of way or pivot their business. They might have been selling one particular product and they heard about something that they had an infrastructure to do some other services. And so they called up a friend and say, "Look, there's a session on Thursdays and this is what they're talking about. This is what they have access to." We had and continually had a text link within a group of women to where I tell you the information that was shared through those texts was just amazing and empowering. Sometimes it was just a blurb. Sometimes it was just sharing what each other were doing that inspired each other. And then the other thing, I think what was important too when we talk about resources is unearthing where those resources were. And it was not, we in this state do not, and even in our local community, we don't have one access point for everything. There's a lot of resources that are happening that exist here in our city and in our state, but getting access to them and finding out where they are or trying to get to them, there's too diverse. You got a website over here, you got a website over here, and some of them don't even have websites. You have institutions that are being paid, administered by our tax dollars, that send out RFPs, and we never hear about it. I heard one organization told me when I found out about a particular RFP opportunity, they told me that they publish it in the paper. Okay, maybe I don't take that paper. Maybe, like with a lot of us, we don't even get the paper anymore. We get our news online, or we may have a particular source. So you need that organization who is being administered by tax dollars need to be sending that RFP out by more than one source. You know, we need to make sure that everybody's getting access to it. So overwhelmingly, what has the small businesses that have had to survive, have been able to survive, is because they are working together to share resources, to be able to identify opportunities to help support each other. But we need to continue to do that as we move forward in COVID. But we need to do it more strategically. We need to form alliances that have a specific 1, 2, 3 agenda. Say that when we come together for this strategy meeting, you already know what your outcomes are going to be. What are we getting accomplished in this particular meeting? What is our outcomes? What is our objective in this particular meeting to get the work done? If it's access to capital, is it making a list of people in leadership that we need to talk to and that we need to get in front of to share our concerns, or get in front of to share our opportunities that are out there? We have to continue to do that and do it in a very strong and very strategic way. And we need to bring in the power brokers like Mr. Bynum, like our other champions. We need to make sure that we're bringing them into the fold also, to be able to share. If for nothing else, sometimes we don't need the Mr. Bynums to provide the money for us. Sometimes we need Mr. Bynums to share some input and some counsel, for us. So that's how I have seen over and over again during this pandemic how businesses are empowering themselves. And if you look at it, if you know the history of small businesses, or if you look at the history of businesses in communities of color, that's how we have grown. That's how we have sustained ourselves. When you talk about the barber who did what he did, he's could no longer afford the brick and mortar, but he looked at other ways to empower himself and continue to do the work. This is something that's not new to us. That's what we have as business of color that we got going for ourselves. Yeah, this is a pandemic, but we've had our own personal pandemics in our community way before COVID-19. And many of us have been living in a pandemic situation for 20, 50 years. It's been generational. So let's make sure that we take these opportunities to really move ourselves forward. So I'm excited about. I'm old school. So when we go back to what our mothers and our fathers and stuff have always done and has been successful, I get excited. I get inspired. And I just love it. And I just think we need to do more of that.
And yeah, I think when you were mentioning about your barber, I think a lot of that is happening. In some of our meetings, we're hearing we can't get people to come back to work. We can't get them to come back to work after the pandemic because of unemployment. And I was like, yes, because they are getting unemployment and they're doing something they've always wanted to do and they have time to do, start their own business. And that's what's happening. A lot of people are good at doing makeup. They're good at, like you said, your barber, and we're also realizing we can do more with little. If your barber has brick and mortar and you can't have more than 5 people in at a time, do I really need 3,000 square feet? Or can I just, figure out how to make this work when I have someone coming, here, and you can still be legal and with license, at your home. Do I really need all of that? Because people really getting out, or do I want to change it? Do I want to be a traveling barber and go to them where they're safe? And so those are the things that are innovative. But I think a lot of what's happening right now, yes, people are starting up because you can start a business on Facebook. You can promote on Facebook. People are not doing websites as much as they used to, because with websites, if you're not keeping it, if you don't have the ability and the time to keep it updated, because that takes a lot of work, it's not a benefit to have a website if the information is not accurate. And so I think right now people are starting up boutiques. I've seen so many startup boutiques, so many, clothing lines. I've seen people selling stuff, from cooking, from all of that, and being, food. Food shops have always been big, but, they're coming to you because no longer are the times where people are gathering together. So you don't need all the space that you had before. I mean, like me, a mother of 3, and my youngest is about to go off to school in a few years. And I was like, do I really need all this space? When I can do just as much with a lot less, and it's still beneficial to me and the people around me. So I think that's what a lot of these businesses are doing. They've been forced to see things a different way, and they've been given the opportunity with unemployment to say, hey, I can either. And what's so interesting is they're saying they're just sitting at home collecting unemployment. I was like, that's not what they're doing. They're having the opportunity to have time to do things that they really enjoy doing, and that's feeding into them. And this is just kind of the bootstrap, which annoys me, that analogy. They have actual bootstraps now to do the things that they wanted to do. So I think that's what's happening. I think we're seeing some of those doors close, like Barbara, much like you, a person that was on my hair was like, Kathy, why do I need to have a shop that big when you can call me and say, hey, I can take a person at my house, like that. And so that's what's happening. They're thinking smarter, and bigger is not always better.
And I want to say one last thing before we close too, Mr. Bird, is that Dr. Olga Osby with Clean Slate Behavior, she's a financial social worker, and she's doing a lot of work in our communities of color around how we look at money and how we feel about our money. And I think that's, Kathy touched a little bit on that also. We before we even start our businesses, how we look at our dollars, how we're spending our dollars, what we're putting our priorities on. And one of the things we're learning during COVID is we don't need what we thought we needed. And it doesn't matter what your economic situation, whether you're making $100,000 or you were making $20,000. We all have now begun to assess what our needs are, and also how we relate to money. Some of us still have shame about money because a lot of times we've not had money. Our families have not had money, and there's that you have that challenge. And then finances, especially for women, can be traumatizing because we're struggling with it every single day. And even just the thought of even having a conversation about money becomes traumatic for us because it brings on a lot of pain. Not enough rent, not enough money to pay the rent, not enough money to empower your children for a better education and all those particular things. So let's be real. We talked a lot today about business development and what status of Black-owned businesses, but these are real tough times, and we have to give ourselves a little credit for surviving through them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're reaching the conclusion of this panel. I want to say thank you, Ms. Willie Jones, and thank you, Kathy Northington, for being our panelists. I think the conversation was great. It was edifying. I myself have learned some things today that I did not know prior to this panel. And I'll just quickly wrap up a few things that we did talk about. To your point, Ms. Jones, we did talk about a lot of the structural inequities and challenges that Black-owned businesses have faced in accessing relief with the Payment Protection Program, and in access relief with the Back to Business Program. But beyond those challenges, we do see and have witnessed how Black-owned businesses have remained resilient and creative in responding to the pandemic in the face of the lack of access. Because to your point, is that this is not a new phenomenon for the Black community. Well, particularly in Mississippi, where 60% of our counties have had a poverty rate of at least 20%, for at least 30 years. So said differently, like we've been in a pandemic for centuries, if you want to look at it that way. And so not having adequate access is not necessarily new. But what is new is the ways in which the pandemic has pressed down and isolated what we would now call a gig economy, where you have barbers and hair, and women that do hair, the hair salon, the beauticians. I'm sorry, they can no longer work in the shop, so they have to work out their house. They have to work out of a shed. They have to work in their yard, right? But I think if anything, leaving this conversation, I want us to think about the ways in which we can continue to support Black-owned businesses, whether that be supporting the 2% initiative, where we ask and advocate that large corporations invest 2% of their net income into small Black-owned businesses. Or it could be investing in the CDFIs. We understand that CDFIs are uniquely positioned to cater to the needs of Black-owned businesses. We have flexible and affordable financial products to tap into what these communities need as compared to mainstream financial institutions. And lastly, another thing, and maybe the most important thing that has come out of this panel, is the simple idea that we need to retain hope, is that we need to be willing to show up and be counted, even in the face of something like the COVID-19 pandemic. So I will say again, thank you all for attending the panel. Thank you all for offering your voices and perspective. And I hope to see you all again in the future advocating for the success of Black-owned businesses.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a nice day.
You too.